some public schools in terms of the shift from sevens to the secondary level. With the changing of the school leaving age, our year sevens a number of our year sevens are that 6 months older in year 7, but that is not the motivational force in terms of saying let's make sure that we do provide the best educational outcomes, and one of the ways to do that is to move sevens into the secondary stream. Particularly with regard to the national curriculum, and as the national curriculum is rolled out, we've got to get to a point where we do provide that specialist education for students in year 7, that we do provide a specialist subject matter teachers for year 7 students, and that is best provided in the secondary environment. The primary education system will always provide the foundation skills for our students, but the specialist teaching, the specialist learning, the specialist curriculum is best enhanced at the secondary level, and that's where the year 7s will move, and they'll take advantage of those specialist teachers and that specialist curriculum. Now, there will be some issues, particularly with regard to schools in some areas of the regions, in the rural and particularly the remote areas. And again, I very much appreciate the concerns that you may have with this regard. Now, the state government has allocated over $250 million for infrastructure spend with regard to ensuring that we do assist schools in the transition, but that is not going to necessarily placate schools in the regions who feel that it is going to have a direct impact on school communities. Can I just say to you, to give you a bit of solace, that no school will close as a result of the fact that students will be moving to year 7. Now, in some instances, small schools do face the prospect of actually closing or amalgamating or annexing with host schools. That has always been a thing of the past, always. And in some instances, it enhances student learning because, of course, it does provide more opportunities in the learning space to be in a larger school environment, and that will continue to occur. But in terms of closing schools as a direct result of the transition from 7s to secondary level, that won't occur. We will continue to monitor it in the regions. We'll continue to provide support. There will be a transitional phase with district directors, and district directors will be able to make a conscious value decision with regard to whether or not there will be a transition for some particular students. But we'll continue to work with schools in the regions to make sure that it is as seamless as possible. So I very much appreciate the issues that we have there. In terms of moving on to another area, in terms of assessment, in terms of quality education, we, as I say, and I say this quite sincerely, we have a magnificent education system in Western Australia. There is always this notion of comparative analysis and comparative value judgments. Those in the printed media salivate at the prospect of having league tables. They salivate at the prospect of comparing one school with another. They salivate at the prospect of comparing one state with another to determine whether or not that is an indication of success or failure of that educational system. And, you know, it is naive in the extreme to assume that those comparisons can be made and any value can be put on those comparisons. That's why I'm at pains to say to the West and to say to the Sunday Times, you are causing such a disservice to education by listing schools from 1 through 10. You know what they used to do once upon a time, and this is not so far back, I've got to say, this is only less than a decade ago, they used to list the bottom 10 schools in terms of outcomes for TE results, which is just nonsense. That completely deprives the school environment in terms of the great learning that takes place within that particular cohort, but also what takes place in terms of pastoral care and individual development of those students within those school environments. It completely diminishes the role of the parent body, the community as a whole, to make sure that everything that possibly can be done for that school environment is done. It's based upon a raw, crude assessment of academic achievement based on the TE result. And you can never, ever compare a school, for example, in a remote areas of Western Australia with somewhere within the western suburbs and do so legitimately. It is beneath contempt that our media, as I said, almost salivate at the prospect of doing that on an annual basis. And that comes down to our NAPLAN testing. Our NAPLAN results have consistently improved, particularly over the 3 to 5 year and then 7 to 9 over the last 3 years. There have been significant improvements. In addition to that, there has been a 9% increase in ATAR students that have received 55. That is what is seen as the variable for entrance into university. There has been a 107% increase in VET take-up and graduation over that same time period. So statistically alone, to the West and the Sunday Times, eat that. You know, those results, why don't we see a bit of ink on that? Why don't we see some productive, positive reporting of results in Western Australia on that criteria? Don't wait until you get a negative story before you report it. Let's have a look at some good positive stories in terms of what's happening in education in Western Australia. And one of the greatest improvements in Western Australia over the last 3 years has been through Aboriginal education. We're dealing with Aboriginal people with one of the most marginalised groups in our community. They have unacceptably low literacy numeracy rates. They have appalling housing conditions in some instances, very, very poor health conditions in some instances, and very, very poor mental health facilities in some instances. As a community, as a society, as a state, as a nation, we've got to do more for these magnificent people, and we continue to do so. It's very difficult in Western Australia, given the fact that we have about 239 remote communities, and it's very, very difficult to provide quality education to a number of those students, to ensure that their retention at school is maintained, to ensure that their opportunities in school are exactly the same as their non-Indigenous brothers and sisters. As Minister for Indigenous Affairs, it's a portfolio that I fought for, spat the chewy eventually and got it. I love it. I can tell you it is a top priority for me that we do continue to show improvements in terms of literacy and numeracy rates for Aboriginal people, because one of the greatest barriers for Aboriginal people in terms of where they go and make a meaningful contribution, not just to the community but personally, is through improving educational outcomes, so that when they do reach secondary school, they do have reading and writing skills that are equal to their non-Indigenous brothers and sisters. So that, as I've said, is it's good. I'm delighted that we have seen significant improvement, but we've still got a way to go in that area. Another area I'd like to touch on, albeit briefly, is... how am I going, mate? Yeah. Cheers. Okay. Is one that I'm sure impacts on virtually every school community, and that is regard to behaviour management. Behaviour management is something that sort of is touched on constantly within our schools. Again, the media love to talk about certainly not just behaviour management in a general sense, but in terms of suspensions, in terms of whether or not students attend school on a regular basis, attendance numbers, and so on, and the drift to the private sector. Well, let me tell you right at the outset, that drift has actually been stemmed, and it is actually increasing. The numbers of students in our public education system is actually increasing, which is good. But across the whole gamut of behaviour management, it is a major issue. I'm very, very aware of the fact that on a daily basis, tens of thousands of students in our schools suffer in silence at the hands of bullying. Now, it comes through it's manifested in a much more sophisticated nature now than ever before. There's this misguided notion that bullying somehow is someone hitting someone in the shoulder or hitting someone in the head or pulling someone's hair, and that's bullying. And yes, that type of bullying is unacceptable, and that type of bullying is so transparently evident, but it is a much more subtle form of bullying. Children in today's society become much more sophisticated, as I said, in terms of their capacity to bully their peers. Through the internet, through Facebook, through tweeting, through texting, through emails, okay, through students suffering in silence, through the cold shoulder treatment, all of these areas. And it transcends a whole raft of areas. Anything that they can be picked on in a lot of instances is fair game. You know, not through gender, through race, through homophobic bullying, a whole raft of areas you have whereby students, for some reason, take delight in making their peers feel diminished. Now, that manifests itself, and as I said, in a very generic concept of behaviour management, and it is absolutely essential that we continue to focus on it. Now, we as a government have been very, very proactive in that space. One of the major contributing factors to the independent public school system was to ensure that if schools did want to provide more opportunities in terms of behaviour management, they could do so through pastoral care, increased pastoral care. Again, that is not diminishing those non-IPS schools. We have continued to provide significantly more money and resources for enhanced behaviour management in our schools. For example, there was an additional $47 million for behaviour management and discipline strategy, which will be rolled out throughout our public education system over forward estimates. We also committed to an additional 60 school psychologists, of which we have delivered. Now, school psychologists play a pivotal role in terms of providing support and providing advice to students. But in some instances, they are just inappropriate in the eyes of some of our students. So we also provided another $10 million for the chaplaincy program. And the chaplaincy program is a terrific program. It really is. Chaplains play a wonderful role in our schools. It is a pastoral care role. It is a role where they can intimately talk with students, to the students in confidence, and provide support for students who feel the need. In addition to that, we provided an additional $3 million for our care schools. That's curriculum and re-education in education schools. Now, they are fundamentally funded by the federal government. The federal government reduced their funding. We increased that funding, and at the same time, we have used those care schools to provide an avenue for those students that are just not attuned to authoritarian schooling. And it'd be naive to assume that all students are. So about 97 of our students from the public education system are now engaged in the care school environment. And they are educational institutions which do fundamentally deal with the disengaged students. As I said, those students that simply are not attuned to authoritarian schooling. And with the raising of the school leaving age, you are going to have a proportion of students that are going to fall into that category. In addition to that, as a government, as I said, we are very, very aware of the fact that the job still hasn't been done, that we still continue to roll out policies that we already have that are implemented within our school environment to make sure that students, when they go to school, do feel safe, and also as significant that our teachers feel safe, that they do feel in an environment where they are supported from above, they are supported from below, they do have the resources, the strategies, the expertise to deal with the manifest issues that exist within our community. As I said, teachers in contemporary society are much different to teachers from 10, 20 years ago. The chalk and talk days are long gone. Teachers in contemporary society not only have to be educators from an academic perspective, they have to be counsellors, they have to be support mechanisms, they have to be, in a number of instances, cooks, they have to be drive students here, there and everywhere. The role of contemporary teachers in our public education system is much more significant than it ever was before in terms of the role that they play. So in order to make sure that we can ask them to effectively fulfil that role, we must provide them those resources. So as I've said, we've significantly increased the funding to our public schools for behaviour management. We've significantly increased school psychologists, significantly increased funding to the care schools and the chaplaincy program, and we also have the behaviour management centres. I've got to be honest with you, and I'll be perfectly frank here. For me personally, the jury's still out on the behaviour management centres. I want to make sure I want to be convinced that those behaviour management centres are the best use of government money, that money is most effectively going towards ensuring that behaviour management in our public education system is enhanced. The feedback that I've received over the last month or two is that, yes, they're working quite effectively, but it is a lot of money for a small group of students. I just want to make sure we are using that money effectively. Don't read anything into that. I am not for a moment suggesting that I'm going to get rid of the behaviour management centres. If they're working effectively, so be it, but I just want to make sure that all of our schools are effectively resourced. So having said all of that, I think that just about covers the main issues. There are a number of others. Of course, I could talk all day. I won't bother. I won't bore you. Having said that, I am very, very aware, and I mean this most sincerely again, of the role that you play within your school environment. Schools can simply not operate through teachers, administrators, students, buildings alone. Schools desperately need the support, the expertise, the experience, the enthusiasm of our parent bodies. Not just our parent bodies, but the community as a whole, so that the role that you play should never, ever be diminished in the eyes of the community and also in your eyes. Each day you go to the school, you should give yourselves a pat on the back, very aware of the fact that the school, the education system, the community as a whole is very appreciative of the contribution that you make. So thank you very much, and I look forward to working with you certainly until March 9th, and I like to think in the 4 years beyond that. So thanks very much.